I'm Melissa Loble. I'm our Vice President of Platform and Partnerships here at Instructure. I am responsible for standards and making sure that all of our technologies, all of our platforms are not only standards compliant, but also open and integratable, and create the ability for you all to build really empowering and successful ecosystems. So that's my role. I'd like to ask a quick question, or a couple quick questions of all of you. How many of you are from the K-12 space? Okay, so we got like 3 or 4, so probably about 10%. How many of you are from higher ed? All right, okay, so that's probably about 80%. How many of you are vendors of some nature or another? Okay, 5%. All right, that's really helpful for me as I share with you the latest and greatest around standards, and in particular, obviously, Canvas. One more question for you. How many of you know what IMS is? Okay, that's great, thank you. That's about half the audience. That helps me also understand how much context to share with you as I talk about standards. So let me just start with what I thought would be best to structure this session around. And that's to help you understand, first, our philosophy on standards. Second, what's the latest related to standards in Canvas? Where are we compliant? Where are we working on compliance? And then 3, what our future vision is. And in that vision, I have a bit of a call to action for you all to help us move standards forward in the ed tech community and beyond. So that's the goal for today. It'll go, I'm going to definitely leave at least 10-15 minutes for questions for y'all. So don't hesitate to write those down and be ready at the end to ask. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Before I get into those 3 objectives, I did want to share with you who your, I'll call us spy instructors, if I want to use the theme here, or who are your standards specialists in the organization. So within Instructure, we actually have me, and this is partly my responsibility, among other things, but we also have 2 people dedicated to ensuring that Canvas and all of our platforms are standards compliant, and that we're active in developing and moving the standards initiatives and participating in the standards communities. So Karl and Lauren, and at the end, I'll be giving you contact information for all of us, so you can reach out to all of us at any time. But I wanted to make sure you knew who Karl and Lauren are, although they're a little incognito here on this slide, because you will see them as you ask questions, as you interact in the standards community, and we're always here to get feedback and to try to help direct the standards in the way that best impact all of you. Okay, I will also say those are my 2 most exciting slides. I have the world's probably worst PowerPoint, but I did this deliberately because I figured you would all want it afterwards. It's very content heavy and a lot of detail around very specific standards. So I'll make sure this whole slide deck is available after the fact, and wanted to make sure that what I'm saying is also reiterated on the slides. So sorry that I won't be entertaining you with my slides, but hopefully I'll be delivering a lot of really valuable information related to standards for you. So speaking of that, I wanted to start with our philosophy. So Canvas and Instructure was founded on the concept of openness. And you've heard this probably over and over again from us. I know Jared touched on it a little earlier today. Mitch Benson touched on it yesterday. We highly value openness. Openness to us means making sure that you can do what you want with the Canvas platform and with everything that happens within it. So the data, the interactions, that should all be in your hands, and you should be able to manipulate it in any way you wish. The challenge with being open and making sure you have things like an open architecture and open technology is that can be challenging to maintain. So this is where we firmly believe that standards are critical, because what standards does is it enables us to create an open platform in a very standardized manner so that those kinds of integrations become so easy and simple, you don't even realize that you're building this ecosystem, this really complex technological beast, because it's so easy to bring it all together using these standards. We care so much about it that we contribute to standards. We actively participate in a variety of different standards organizations to make sure that not only are we understanding the importance of those standards and how to be compliant, but we're also taking your voice to the table. So speaking of that, like I said before, you will get this presentation. And I wanted to just give you a little bit of background around the standards organizations that we currently participate in and how we've related to them since our inception. So the first logo is IMS. I asked in the very beginning, about half of you knew what IMS is. So IMS Global is an organization, it's a nonprofit organization focused on developing standards, particularly for the educational technology community. It's predominantly focused on K-12 and higher ed, although there's some corporate activity in it as well. And its members, it has over 450 members worldwide, and its members include institutions, districts, schools, and vendors like us. So, IMS has been around for, oh gosh, I think at least 15 years. We've been active contributing members. This means we pay money to be in the organization at the very highest level, and it means that we have representation, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, throughout the organization. We've been members since 2013, although have supported their standards and certified in their standards since Canvas's inception. We also are very committed to not only the success of the standards that they produce, but IMS as well. And in fact, we were one of the very first adopters of the most popular standard in the EdTech community, LTI, or Learning Tools Interoperability. That partner tent that probably many of you have visited, the majority of the integrations supported by the partners in that tent are LTI based. And we were one of the very first adopters. I actually brought some EduApp stickers with me just because EduApp Center was one of the first marketplaces, and I'm going to call it a marketplace even though you don't pay for anything there, of LTI tools. Instructure actually created that. It's LMS agnostic, so there are tools up there that may not be Canvas tools, they may just be another provider's tools, but the predominant collection of those tools are LTI-based tools. And we brought that platform to the market because we wanted to make sure that LTI and other standards produced in the EdTech space were consistently being moved forward and utilized by the community. It makes it easier for everyone if you're using standards. The last thing I'll mention just about our background with IMS is that, as I've mentioned earlier, not only do we make sure we're compliant, we contribute fairly significantly. And so if any of you have used a third-party tool within Canvas, and you've done probably what's referenced as deep linking, or you've actually pulled up a picker of that tool, selected a very particular activity, assignment, piece of content, and embedded it in your course, that is actually a service related to LTI. It's called Content Item Message, and we were the ones that originated that with some of our partners, contributed back to IMS, and now that's been adopted as an industry standard. And we hope to continue to do that because we see these use cases from you all the time, right? We see, you don't want to link to a third-party tool's main homepage. That doesn't get you anywhere, right? Students still have to navigate all the way in to find something. So we saw that use case from you, thought about how we could extend the standard, and then that contributed that back to the community. Now, the second organization that is a standards body that we participate in is A4L. We're a new member of this organization. This organization predominantly owns a standard called SIF. I'll talk about that in a second as it's related to student information systems. But we saw the importance of supporting SIF, particularly for our K-12 customers. And not only did we want to just go certify, we figured that just like we do with IMS, we need to contribute to that community so we can make sure that standard continues to move and grow in the direction that our customers want it to. So those are the main organizations from a standards perspective and an interoperability perspective that we've historically been a part of. There are other organizations related to standards in the accessibility space, in the privacy space, and we have other representation that actively participate in those, although many of those organizations don't produce actual technical specifications. They more produce best practices and thought leadership, and we're active in those as well. Okay, so let's get to the stuff that you're probably all here to hear. current compliance. So specifically for IMS standards related to LTI. So LTI is a standard, and then there are services related to LTI, where you need to have a version of LTI, sometimes a very specific version of LTI installed, and then you need to have those services alongside them to do some extra special things. They're not actually mandated as part of the LTI standard, but they're these extra special things that certain kinds of providers might want to leverage. So if we think about the laundry list of LTI, we are currently LTI 1.0, 1.1, and 1.1.1 compliant. You're probably thinking, for those of you not as familiar with the standards world, why do you have to be compliant with all three? And that is because in some cases of standards in IMS, they are not backwards compliant. They don't roll up into the next level of standard. So in this case, they aren't. Each one of those standards does things slightly differently. And our vendors, those vendors in the tents and the broader community, there's over 280 of them out there that work with us, may use any one of those to support their integration. Now, I should also say that we have to recertify every year according to IMS in these standards. So every year we are testing our work to make sure that the latest and greatest of Canvas still works with the backward, any one of these compliant standards. We're also certified in outcome service and content item message. I described what content item message was earlier, and this is for LTI 1. Outcome service allows you to do an additional level of passback of a single grade as related to LTI. Those are probably the most common LTI certifications in the market. There is also the latest version of LTI, not backwards compliant either, so we would continue to be supporting 1.0, 1.1, and 1.1.1, but there's LTI 2 and soon to be LTI 2.1. LTI 2 has been out since 2014. We did some very initial development work. In fact, we are, as you can see on my slide, we do support core rostering capabilities, and I would say we're probably about 85–90% complete with that LTI work. When the draft spec, though, of LTI 2 came out, it was very much a moving target. And so we watched it for a little bit because we didn't want to necessarily have to reinvest engineering efforts 3–4 times, right? You want cool tools. You don't want us constantly rewriting to a standard that's a moving target. So we sort of halted, and it was a good thing because we have some concerns with that standard that have been remedied in LTI 2.1. Actually, those concerns shaped LTI 2.1, and once again, an example of our contribution to the development of standards. LTI 2.1 is currently, we're waiting on IMS to finish their certification suites. So in order for us to be compliant, we have to test against a set of certification tools, and we're in the middle of working with IMS to get those certification suites done. Any week now? I'm hopeful, but as soon as those certification suites are done, we'll be compliant and we'll be posting the access to utilizing LTI 2.1 for any of our vendors and any of you out there developing tools or technologies to work inside Canvas. Question, yes?
So if you were to become 2.1 compliant, what happens to the custom application that we have developed in 1.0?
Yep. So the question is, I have a tool that I've built, and using either 1.0, 1.1, or 1.1, if Canvas becomes LTI 2.1 compliant, what happens? And the answer is absolutely nothing, because we will always support LTI 1, 1.1, and 1.1.1 as well, so it won't affect your tool at all. The only advantage to LTI 2.1 is there's a lot of advantages, but it's more advanced processes in how you install tools, how you manage tools, how you permission tools. And in that case, there may be interest down the road for you to go to LTI 2.1 in order to add some additional capabilities, but you would not have to. Yep. Now, the other question that we often get is, as I mentioned before, there's those services that sit alongside LTI that leverage LTI. So we often get asked about membership services. Membership services, currently, we do support the rostering capabilities of membership services to support predominantly LTI 2, but you do need to use an API token with that, and that can get cumbersome. You need an API token with that because we have some security concerns around how it might be used. So hopefully with LTI 2.1, we'll very quickly thereafter support membership services in their fullest capacity with 2.1, and you hopefully will not have to issue API tokens to enable the membership services. Membership services does some additional rostering, some really cool rostering stuff, and other things that a number of tools are starting to get excited about leveraging. Okay, so that's LTI. That's the big one probably that everybody's interested in. Let's talk a little bit about SIS standards. So earlier, I think it was in the middle of April, IMS launched OneRoster 1.1. OneRoster 1.1 is for predominantly in the K-12 space, a way to be able to do both rostering and grade passback between a tool and a student information system in most cases. We support the rostering capabilities of OneRoster 1.1. We're completing our grade passback capabilities as we speak, and I'm hopeful any week now those will be available as well. On the higher ed side, or the higher ed equivalent is LIS, we are LIS 2.0 compliant. We received that compliance earlier this year. That's been a standard out for quite a while in the higher education space. Predominantly, we will leverage it for our integrations with Oracle PeopleSoft tools and Illusion tools. They leverage LIS, and that helps us be able to build those integrations with things related to their particular SIS products. Okay. In addition, as I mentioned before, SIF. SIF is also a K-12 standard predominantly, although it can be used a little bit in higher ed as well. It's that A4L standard. We have become compliant in SIF, joined that community, and are leveraging that for some of our integrations with some of our larger SIS partners as well. Question related, yes?
Do you have a timeline for Illusion?
That's a good question. So I believe right after me, so the question is, I apologize just to repeat this, do we have a timeline for Illusion? So ILP in particular, and we're going to leverage LIS to do ILP integration. And I don't know the exact timeline. It should be before the end of the year, but I think it's a lot sooner than that.
Okay.
Yep. I believe right after me there's a session by our SIS program manager, our product manager, and she will know the exact timeline. It should be at least by the end of the year, but hopefully sooner. We're testing it now. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so that's the SIS standards. Now, how about all those other standards out there, right? I probably should have shared this slide as a separate one for Caliper, because Caliper is starting to become the new LTI, not in what it does, but that in its popularity in the industry. So for those of you unfamiliar with Caliper, Caliper is a standard related to how data is shared among tools. It's actually a way so that you can consistently emit data in a very consistent way so that tools can then ingest it. It's like in my non-technical mind, I would call it a transcoding process, right? It's a way to get things to talk to each other using the same language. So we are awaiting very anxiously for Caliper 1.1 to come out. Caliper 1.0 came out earlier this year. We are compliant. It's not overly useful in this space yet, and the Caliper committee and the Caliper working group and IMS knew this and followed very quickly with developing Caliper 1.1. The certification tests are also being built as we speak. We've done all the work to be certified in 1.1, and so we expect that to happen any week now as well. What this will enable, though, is for us to take Canvas data, leverage our live event structure, and emit Caliper, I'll call it Caliperized, I'm not sure if that's the right phrase, but Caliperized data. So now data's coming out of Canvas in a Caliper format, and other tools that want to ingest that data can ingest that data and know that they can understand it or read it because it's in Caliper format. I've often gotten asked, are we going to ingest data? Can we not only admit, but can we bring in Caliper data? The answer is yes, we could bring in Caliper data. It can be stored in Canvas. We just need to think about how and where we would want to visualize it. So the analytics team, I know Mitch Benson yesterday in his keynote talked a lot about analytics. They are thinking about how in this new dashboard creation we can leverage Caliper data that may be admitted from other tools so that you can get a bigger picture of how your students are performing and how you can use that to either intervene or impact that student performance. Some standards that have been around for a long time are thin common cartridge and common cartridge. You'll see there are all the versions that we're compliant in as well. They are standards that dictate how content moves from one system to another. So most often publishers will generate common cartridge or thin common cartridge files as a way to then be uploaded into a system. But there are other tools out there that leverage these as well. The main difference between common cartridge and thin common cartridge actually has the physical content in it. Thin common cartridge uses LTI pointers to the content. So that way, if publishers are updating content or have more interactive content, rather than having to get them in a format that you actually physically load them up into a system, you can now link to them so that they're dynamic and constantly updated. Very common, once again, with publishers. There are other tools out there that choose to leverage thin common cartridge or common cartridge as a means of moving stuff from one system to another. And those are all the most current versions. We are current in all of these versions of all of these standards. We also hope to certify in QTI 2.2. So QTI 2.1 is a standard related to quizzes and how quiz questions can be moved from system to system. For a long time, Canvas has been certified in QTI 2.1. We hope to be certified in QTI 2.2 just at the moment when quizzes is ready for it. So I think that'll be end of this year, early next year. But we have still some additional quizzes next roadmap work that we're working on, as has been shared here, that we want to make sure we get that done before we do full compliance. And then finally, there's a new emerging standard. It's related to, it's called CASE. It's been the merging of multiple different standards that IMS in particular was developing related to outcomes. So how can you tag content or tag activities, assignments, whatever it might be, with outcomes? And then how do you make sure those outcomes move to other systems, wherever you might put that content or assignments or activities, and how do you display those? Probably the most commonly referenced phrase related to the CASE standard is machine readable standards. And then there's also merged in some of the work that groups were doing around thinking about new models of teaching, including competency education. So we're watching this standard, we're active in the groups. I think it's just recently voted on, so it should be finalized. I think it actually is finalized, and we're working on our roadmap to also support this. Where this would affect you most commonly would be if publishers are going to share content into Canvas, you would be able to then see all of the outcomes alignments related to that. That's probably the most common use case where you'd see CASE. We also work really closely with some of the great curriculum, assessment tools. There's this new category emerging around that, around assessment in particular, and there's great uses for the CASE standard in supporting the movement of rubrics or using and transferring data in rubrics from one system to another, and we're really excited about leveraging that as well. All right. So those are that's the baseline of how current we are and in what standards, predominantly the IMS standards. Let me jump into a little bit about how we participate. I alluded to this earlier, and to let you know where we're representing Canvas and our customers in a number of places, particularly in IMS. So as you can see on the slide, I'm active in IMS as a member of the Technical Executive Advisory Board, but I'm also on the LTI and Caliper product steering committees. The reason I am on both of those committees, IMS is generous to include Canvas, but because we find that both of those standards are probably the standards that are going to most affect our customers in the broadest way. And so we want to make sure we're at the table, being very active in the development and the use of those standards at the strategic level as well as at the very tactical level. So then you'll also see up here where we have representation in the actual working groups. In many cases, we have developers participating in those working groups, but we also do have product managers actively contributing ideas, user examples, and case studies. The last thing I'll mention related to this, because this has been, I've heard some folks talking about it at the conference. I also am co-chair of the Privacy and Security Committee for IMS. I am particularly interested in the privacy and security related to platforms and tools that are connecting to platforms. Right? We want to make sure data, the right data, is being passed in secure ways, and that the end user is aware of that passing of data. So in that committee, we're working hard on some best practices around what kinds of information do tools share at the time of launch or at the time of install, so that the end user is fully aware of the privacy policies related to that tool, how their data is being used, and potentially even has options to opt in or opt out. So this is emerging work. You'll see more of it come out of IMS, but I am active in it. I personally am very passionate about this. I've been in education and have taught for the last 20 years and think this is really important, but also see this as a very valuable and important thing for Canvas, because we always want to protect and secure our customers and their students. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we're very active in the working groups. We have developers participating in these. Some of the work that we've been doing lately has been actually mentioned in one of the keynotes. I think it was Mitch Benson that mentioned about the plagiarism framework. So that was my team that worked on that framework. It's a combination of LTI plus some API work in Canvas. However, our intention is to work with our partners to find ways to develop a standard out of that so that we could share that with the broader community. What we uncovered was LTI alone doesn't support the way people want to use plagiarism tools in LMSs. People want plagiarism tools to be part of the core native LMS experience in a lot of cases. And so how do we do that in the right way, but in a very standardized way? So that's an example of some very immediate work that we're doing. We've also contributed pretty significantly to the LTI 2.1 development in order to address some of those concerns that I mentioned about LTI 2. Okay, so a couple of tools for you so that you have them as a reference, including how to contact us. I want to make sure you have these, and then I'm going to share your mission and then open it up to questions, although we've had some good questions already. So we are working really hard on communicating this out to our community and helping them understand how you can engage with us related to standards. One of the challenges that we've had in the past, Mitch Benson spoke about this in his keynote, was that we've been quiet about our work. We do it, it's in the backdrop, it just makes things work. But because we've been really quiet, we've had folks challenge us on how much do you really care about standards, and are you really using standards, and you know, are you thinking about our best interests in how we're utilizing Canvas as part of a larger ecosystem? So in response, we realized we need to share the work that we're doing and then give you all opportunities to contribute to that work, help us understand what you need out of us in this work. So you'll see here that we have we constantly post on our blog the latest and greatest related to standards. For example, we'll be having a blog post go up shortly focused on some of the latest CIS certification that we've done around OneRoster. I also should say, I should have said this earlier, I'm very proud of this. Gauge launched yesterday, and at the point of launch for Gauge, Gauge was OneRoster 1.1 certified. So we launched a product that was certified right out of the gate. So we're very excited about that, especially for a very new standard in the market. So you'll be able to see what we're doing in our activities through our blog. We have a community page that's going to go up, I think, next week that will detail a grid of all of our compliance related to standards. If you go to the IMS webpage, you can see that, although it's hard to understand. I will tell you, the key to understanding that webpage is that because we're not a version system, you're going to see our compliance on that webpage as dated. It's dated because they have to refer to the date as that version of Canvas. So it's kind of confusing. It doesn't look like we're always compliant in things, but we fully are. So we're simplifying that, putting that in a grid, putting it on the community, and then making notes to, if we're not compliant in something yet, why not, and when do we expect to be compliant in that standard. So that should be up next week. I just saw a great final draft of it the other day. You can also always go to IMS or A4L to get more information, and then you can always reach out to us either through, if you're a vendor, through our partners.instructure.com site and email through there, or our standards team. So myself, Karl, and Lauren, who you saw at the very beginning, we're always available at standards@instructure.com to answer any questions related to standards that you may have. All right, so my last point will be my call to action for all of you. So I've mentioned before, we're very active at IMS, and we try very hard to represent your use cases, your needs, your requirements. The challenge is, no matter how well we do that and how vocal we are, we're still one vendor, one person at the table. So these working groups often consist of a number of vendors and a couple of institutions participating. Many of the working groups are very vendor heavy and institution or district light. So my request and my call to action to you is, if you have the capacity or interest, please also contribute to IMS, because the more voices that we can get, the more likely we're going to be able to drive standards in the most meaningful ways for you. You don't want just a bunch of vendors at the table hashing out standards. You want to be there with your use cases, your user stories, to also help make sure those standards drive the industry forward. If you don't have that capacity, I know you're all very strapped for resources and talent and all of that, right? You need to be doing your core mission, which is so amazing. Please at least use that standards@instructure.com email to send us your user stories, send us your ideas. We want to hear from you what you want out of the standards. I wish that tools could work this way. Great, that helps us know where we need to extend standards or evolve standards. That's really important to us so that we know we are actually representing you at that table in the most accurate and innovative way possible. Okay, so that was the end of what I had planned to share. I would be happy to answer more questions about our philosophy, about standards compliance, or anything related to our open platform. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, in the back.
Regarding LTI-2.1 and API, you said that currently with LTI, basically you have to give the LTI application an API key.
Yes.
That has a bad security because it gives that application basically unrestricted access to Canvas.
Yes.
And how is
Yes.
LTI-2 is going to change that, and is it similar model to what we have with OAuth?
Yep. Okay.
Limited access.
Yeah. So let me summarize his question. One of the challenges about tools integrating into Canvas is if you're using LTI-2 in particular, for some of the services, you need to have an API key. We don't give API keys on behalf of you. You all have to generate those API keys so that, so that the third party can actually access Canvas and access the data that it needs. This is actually most commonly used with our open API, but as I mentioned earlier, parts of our LTI-2 membership services compliance also requires that. The reason it requires that is because we want to make sure that you are actually granting that tool permission to access Canvas in the way it needs to. So here's the problem that the question was raising. That an API key is not often specific enough to very specific pieces in Canvas, so now you're giving more access to your Canvas environment than you may want to, depending on what that tool is doing. So with LTI-2.1, in combination of that and some projects that we're working on internally, we feel comfortable that you'll be able to scope how that tool is accessing when it's using LTI-2.1, how that tool is accessing Canvas, and in what ways, and how are you making sure that that permission is what you wish. We try to make it as secure as possible for you, and I think there was a session either now, darn it, I think it was now or it's right after me, that talks about some best practices for managing API keys, because that's a process. The bigger your ecosystem is, you want to be thinking about how are you letting others have access to parts of Canvas that may not just be pure LTI-1 compliant, where you're more secure. Mm-hmm.
So if you are you saying in the future we can generate the API keys that can restrict only certain functions. They can only call certain functions. That's it?
Yep, that is on the roadmap. So what's on our roadmap is the ability to restrict API keys so that they only access certain functions. Yep,
Okay, that would be
absolutely.
great.
That is usually a very requested feature when folks are getting into the standards work and really talking about building a robust ecosystem, and we do have that on our roadmap. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're excited for that. Other questions? Yes?
Do you have any plans to encourage your partners, the folks who are Canvas certified partners, to provide Caliper events out of their LTI apps in order to get that partner certification?
Gotcha. That's a great question. So the question is, do we have any plans to coax, encourage, nudge, or potentially even include in our certified application process the request that apps generate Caliper data? So we haven't planned to require that yet, predominantly because we don't ingest data yet, and we didn't want to ask our third parties to do something that we may not then do anything with. But the more we hear from folks like you and our client community that it doesn't matter if we don't ingest it, you want that data to go to a data warehouse or whatever other analytics tool you're doing so that you can do the analysis on it. That's exciting. I'm excited to hear that. And yes, I think we would really consider that. We just need to see the evolution of Caliper and make sure it does what it's intended to do. I love that idea though. One of the things that we're doing, I'll mention at the very last, I know I have to wrap up in a couple minutes, is the Edu App Center and our partner, we're launching a new partner portal. In both of those places, we are going to start asking third-party vendors to include links to privacy policies, security policies, and accessibility policies. We could also add to that potentially, do you emit Caliper data? So at the very least, now you're searching against that and it's very apparent if they can emit Caliperized data. And then that also encourages tools like us, like the third parties that you all work with, to drive towards Caliper as well. It's a great idea. I think I have time for one last question if there is one. Yes?
Curious when that change is going to happen in the Edu App Center.
So in the Edu App Center, it won't be, I'll be really clear about the Edu App Center change. We're actually doing enhancements to the Edu App Center this fall, so that should happen by the end of the year. It will not be a vetting. So we are choosing not to vet partners in the Edu App Center. It's an open community, but what we are signaling to the community is these are really valuable pieces of information that when somebody goes to the Edu App Center and searches for something, that information needs to be very prominent so they can make the right decisions about what tools to use. We want to make sure you're empowered to make the decisions. We don't want to make them for you. So that's why we will have those 3 fields. It should be sooner than the end of the year, but I'll say end of the year because that's our roadmap to make that Edu App Center change plus some other updates to Edu App Center. And I think with that, I'm done, out of time. Thank you guys all. Like I said, standards is not a very exciting or sexy topic, so thank you for coming and being a part of this.